Hello, everyone. This is a very special splash of tea coming to you on the uh, 4th of July Independence Day weekend. It's a blistering, hot Independence weekend. The Tea Party celebrates the 250th year of our nation, but even the Tea Party, even though we like our tea hot, even we have limits when it comes to the heat that we're experiencing. I tell you, in a world where records that, according to history records, no other country, no other nation has survived more than 17 years with the kind of government that we have. And there are very few countries that even attempted to have an experience, an experiment with the kind of government that we have. And but we have tested the we have been tested through time, and that beacon of freedom has been strong, has been unwavering all through our tribulations. I think those people, all Americans, should celebrate on this 250th year, just like we did in 1976. There are a group of Americans growing, unfortunately, growing group that seems to want to denigrate not only the celebration, but also those who are celebrating the 250th year. So I don't know how we reconcile that, but I do know one thing, that that we hope that we can continue to maybe go another 250th year, and that we continue to be a melting pot within domestic tranquility. And if a heat index of 112 can't create a melting pot, I don't know what will. But today, this is a very special splash of tea, because on this day we have a candidate that's running for the United States Senate to run against Senator Mark Warner and go against the Democrat machine that has been very fierce and powerful and crushing in Virginia. And I would like to welcome to our audience Bert Mizusawa. Hello, Bert.
Hi, Nelson. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So this audience is not just patriot groups. There are like Christian groups. There's Second Amendment groups. There are parental rights groups. So there's a whole wider range of that. We had just had a summit, and we had like 17 different supporters of that event, and so they all watched these shows for these interviews. And so, if you can introduce yourself to that kind of wide audience.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure and an honor to be on, especially this weekend. You do mention that this form of government is not something we should ever take for granted. And I was doing a little bit of a numbers game. And even though we're 250 years old, we are still kind of in our adolescence compared to a lot of other countries. And so I'm proud to be here with you. I'm also proud to be an American. My parents, I'm the grandson and the son of immigrants to this nation, and they were very grateful. And so my background is, my parents were from different parts of the globe. My father was from Hawaii. His parents immigrated from Japan about 1905, and they worked in the fields in Hawaii. My grandparents on that side were not allowed to become U.S. citizens because of the laws that were in place at the time. And so my father was youngest of about 9, and he and all of his siblings were American citizens by virtue of being born in the territory of Hawaii. And my mother was from the Netherlands, and the story I tell is my dad's immediately older brother was in the 2nd Infantry Division during the Korean War, and he was killed during a famous battle, the Battle of Heartbreak Ridge. And I didn't know about this until much later in life when somebody contacted me to do research. But because of my uncle being killed in action in Korea, they would not send my father, who was in the Army at the time, to Korea because they didn't want 2 sons being killed in the same conflict. So they ended up sending him to the other theater that was taking up a lot of our U.S. soldiers, and that was the European occupation after World War II. And apparently he got around. He had a motorcycle. He met my mother in Amsterdam, and they got married. And I was one of 6 kids they had, and we grew up all over the world. But we did settle in Virginia. They saw the beauty of the Hampton Roads area. My dad was stationed at Langley, and they both love the water. Being from Hawaii and the Netherlands, the water was part of their life. So my background was I was raised by parents who were very grateful to be able to have the opportunities that only America would give. And neither one of them had gone to college, and I was the only one that was looking at trying to get in college without much guidance. And I looked at the military academies because they were free. I mean, that was important to me, but I also liked what they had to offer. It was a very balanced perspective on leadership, on academics, and athletics. And given what I did in high school, I was considered a prime prospect. But I would not have gotten in because Virginia did not accept me as a resident at the time because I only lived here for a few months because we had just gotten reassigned from Europe. And I'm kind of looking at the way we treat illegal aliens now and give them all the benefits of our country. And here I was, the son of a career military person who had just got reassigned back to the United States, and I could not claim residence in Virginia. And so it was a big disadvantage for me because I had to go back to Hawaii, where my dad was from, even though I left there when I was 6 months old. So anyway, I ended up going to West Point. I did very well. I graduated first in my class out of over 1,400 cadets that entered. As you might imagine, that got me off to a pretty good military career. And people said, "Why did you go in the infantry? I mean, that's the hardest part of the military, hardest part of the Army." I says, "Well, that's why I went. Number one, I was grateful to get the education and opportunities that the military academy offered me. But I said, hey, if I'm going to be doing this, I want to be where the action is, and I want to do what the military, and in this case, the Army, was designed to do, and that was to take on the tough assignments overseas to help secure our freedoms and liberties of our allies and friends." And so I had a very successful career. The military kept promoting me up to the rank of 2-star general. I had 4 combat tours. So that defines a lot about my background and why I'm so grateful for the opportunities that America has given us. And one thing about the military I'll just mention before I close out this answer is people who served in the military and served overseas have seen the way other societies, countries, and cultures operate. And they have a broader perspective. They're realists by and large. They know what works and what doesn't. And so I think they have a real fuller appreciation for what America is and what it ought to be.
Well, this has been a very interesting time for our country to have all this upheaval in our 250th year. So you have the other side, you have the Democrat Party now embracing things that are actually a clear and present danger to our republic. They're not compatible, in other words. The Democrats of our grandfathers are a whole different animal than what's happening now. And I believe that a lot of the politics in Virginia has been infused by that. We have a very radical strain going on in our Democrat Party in Virginia. And I hope that the people who live in Virginia will realize that. So as you campaign, how are you addressing that?
Well, everyone, I appreciate that assessment. I think I'm not sure what motivates them. I do think it's out of ignorance. And I did mention that the military are realists. A lot of people who have had experienced communism, including Z. Van Fleet, who appeared at your Tea Party summit, really see America for what a great country it is compared to the country and the societies they left. You can talk to anybody who has had to be raised in a communist country, whether it's Korea or Vietnam now, whether it's the former Soviet bloc, Eastern Europe. We have friends that have come here from the former Yugoslavia and Moldova, other places that were on the other side of the Iron Curtain. They know what the alternative is, and it's not a good one. And so I think when I say that they're operating out of ignorance, I would almost guarantee you a lot of the people that have come here, they either don't know that the alternative is not a good alternative and it will never prove successful in the long run, or they have another agenda, and neither one of them is good. And that agenda might be to basically weaken our country from within. And, I'm looking at the fact that I served 41 years in uniform spent a lot of my time overseas and helping other countries take care of fundamental issues like protecting their borders and their liberties and freedoms and corruption. And now this is being imported into our country from people who should know better. So, what is the answer? The answer is to continue to fight. And as I mentioned, our country is not, even 250 years seems very old. I just did kind of a thought experiment. I don't consider myself that old. I mean, some of the younger people might see the boomer generation as old. It's not like it used to be a couple of generations ago, but I worked in the US Senate in the 1990s. And I happened to work for a US Senator who was a president pro tem, which means he was a senior senator and he was also the senior senator by age. He was born in 1902. And I did a little bit of research. There were people alive in our nation when he was born in 1902. That these people that were alive, they were centenarians at that time. They were alive during the presidency of George Washington, if you can believe that. There were a couple of people over 100 years old. They were born during the presidency of George Washington. So I definitely touched the senator I worked for, but he could have physically touched people that were born during the presidency of George Washington. So as old as 250 years might seem, it's not that old. And I think we're still going through some growing pains. Challenges like what we're going through now might make you tougher, but I think we need tough people to fight.
Yeah.
And if you do study the Revolutionary War, since we're talking about the 2nd of July, the 3rd of July now, the 2nd of July is when we actually had the resolution declaring independence, but the 4th of July became the popular date because that's the date it was signed. But there were 2 days of debate. And I say the 4th of July might be when we declared independence, but it is not when we achieved independence. We had to go through 6 bloody years of fighting, bloody, suffering, tough years led by General George Washington. And Amy, my wife, and I just went down to talk to the Yorktown Republican Party last night, and people said, "Why did you come all the way down here when you could have zoomed in?" I said, "Well, number one, I'm thankful that you gave me the opportunity to zoom in because, driving all over the Commonwealth is not easy. We really did want to go down to Yorktown because that's where our independence was actually won." And so we were able to bookend. I was invited up to Harvard commencement ceremonies, which I was very reluctant to go to, given the way Harvard has been going. But it was to all the veterans that are alumni of Harvard. And they asked me to talk about people who were from Harvard back in the 1700s, during the time of independence, and how they contributed to the Revolutionary War and winning the war. So I was happy to go up there and talk about some of these unheralded graduates of Harvard and how they were there at the very beginning. The shots heard around the world were a year before we declared independence. The Continental Army was stood up about a year before we declared independence, so it predated our country. So that was the very beginning of the war, and Yorktown was the very end of the war. And so even though we celebrate the Declaration, the important part was actually achieving it through basically fighting. And that's why I'm in the Senate race right now. I'm the Army guy in this race. I understand as talk is cheap. You can make declarations, but until you secure victory on the ground, you're not going to be able to have the fruits of the victory.
Mm-hmm.
So I see what's going on, and I'm in this to fight and win.
Well, that's an important thing to know. It's a real test of character, and you're right about the battles that occurred. People that you touched, to people you work with in 1995, can go back and touch the people who were alive when George Washington. That's a blink of an eye on a historical spectrum. That's a blink of an eye. And the thing is that back then, 2/3, at least 2/3 of the American populace were against us committing treason against the king, and 1/3 is just leave me out of it, and they're going to wait to see who's winning. So you have 1/3, and among the 1/3, maybe 3% fought, stood up and fought. They did the action part. So all during this time, we've always had forces that were countering the spirit and the drive for independence, for freedom, for rights, and for liberties. We fought that in the Civil War too, the same kind of arguments, and you progress on towards the 30s when we had riots with unions fighting, all battling the rise of socialism and communism. So it's It's the same forces against our republic, but different labels. And so
Yep.
the only way we overcame that is that there was a small percentage that, even though they knew that they were risking a lot, and nowadays it is a lot because there seems to be an assassination culture that's rising in this country that's very disturbing. But that 3% rose, and it led the rest of the people because they saw the banner that was held up with courage and resolve, and they said, you know what, I'm going to follow that person. But I think in Virginia, and this is the state of presidents, we can't have this strain overtake us. And I think you're right about the ignorance part. The thing that I'm concerned about is how we could get them, what words will resonate with them. I know what words will shut them down, but how can we speak to them? Because some of them are, and there's a growing number of them in Virginia, some of them are, they can listen to our arguments if we say the right words. And by the way, the last thing I want to say is because one of the things that they used in this last election in Virginia was affordability. And as soon as the governor got into power, we've never seen such skyrocketing costs and fines, and the taxing our dogs when we walk, and the taxing and energy, and then gas prices. They got gas tax, and we had a surplus. So I think a reminder of what Virginia Democrats have done to the state might be helpful for those people who think affordability is the number one issue.
Well, I was asked to get in this race because they didn't think there was a credible candidate to take on Mark Warner. And my wife, Amy, and I, it was a joint decision. It was really too late to get in the race. It was the second week of January. And as hard as it is to get into a race, especially a statewide race, especially given the circumstances of a midterm with the Republican in the White House, my wife, Amy, and I agreed it was easier for us to get in this race and fight than it was to sit at home and watch what was going on in our nation and in our state. So we made that decision. We had to make it in 24 hours. And so people have asked us about certain things about the campaign, and I had to say, listen, we didn't have time to get all the campaign bling. There's a lot of things we didn't have an opportunity to do. When we got in this race, I knew we had to get signatures, and I knew that getting signatures was going to be difficult. So we dropped everything we were doing to get out there and get as many signatures as we can. And, about 30% of them are bad. So, but I'm very proud of our effort coming out of the gates cold, because we ended up getting over 19,000 signatures. We turned them in first. We got more signatures than anybody else in the race, including Mark Warner. And so we'll be at the top of the ballot. And so one thing a good general does, and not all of them are good, not all of them have had the combat experience I do, is you got to fight the battles that will allow you to survive, to continue to fight battles. And I knew that if we didn't get on the ballot, nothing else we said or did mattered. And so we had to mobilize all the forces. So people said, why haven't we heard of you? Why haven't we heard of your name? And I'm thinking, well, you haven't heard of anybody until you actually have heard of them. It might sound trite. I got a call from former Governor Glenn Youngkin yesterday, and he said nobody knew who he was until he got
That's right.
which is true, right? Going back further in time, no one had ever heard of Jimmy Carter, and he became the president. So if I didn't get on the ballot, nobody would care who I was. So we had to do that first. But the anomaly this year was we had this ridiculous redistricting effort from the Democrats, and we realized that if we did not win the referendum on the redistricting, even if I were elected senator, I'd be dealing with only one Republican in the Congress on the House side. And I used to work in the Senate, and I worked across with the House, and happened to be Herb Bateman, who was our Republican congressman from the 1st Congressional District. And he was the chair of the Personnel Subcommittee of the House Armed Services Committee. So we were able to get a lot done. So if Virginia didn't have any Republican congressmen for me as the senator to work with, I knew that we were going to be very successful helping Virginians. And so basically we spent the next month or so being at the referendum rallies, fighting, getting everybody to vote no against the referendum. We must have been to about 8 or 9 referendum rallies all over the state. And as you know, the outcome, even though we didn't win that referendum, we did win in a way because we showed how radical the Democrats were,
Yes.
and a lot of people came out, and a lot of people were energized, and not just Republicans, mainly Republicans, but a lot of independents didn't like it either.
Yes. Yes.
Even some Democrats didn't.
Yes.
So I applaud the people that came out and fought that, and it did have an effect, even though we didn't win the referendum per se. I think we got it close enough. We made it easier for the Virginia Supreme Court justices that ended up on the 4-3 majority vote to basically nullify the referendum results. Now that Virginia Supreme Court decision should have been 7-0.
That's right.
Pretty clear cut, 7-0. There were 4 potential issues where the referendum could have been nullified. They chose one in particular, and it boiled down to this one issue: what is the definition of an election? And I'm thinking, for God's sakes, we've been a country for 250 years now, more or less, and I'm thinking we don't know how to define an election. Well, the Democrats got hoisted by their own petards by opening up the election for 45 days. And that's how they lost. But my main point here is that should have been a 7-0 vote.
Yeah.
And we know that the Democrat appointed justices, we call them activists. I have stronger words for it.
Yes,
I think
me too.
they're not following the judicial ethics canons where they need to be impartial. There's no coincidence that they always back the side that they're almost like an extension of the legislative branch. I think that'll be another issue for the general election, where they should have nullified the referendum before it actually occurred.
Yes. Yes.
Of course, we like the fact that the Democrats wasted $80 million plus
Yes.
referendum.
Yes.
But to be fair, that money could have been used for other things in Virginia, infrastructure, utilities, whatever. I mean, it turned out to be a waste of money, and the judicial branch is going to render itself irrelevant. But I surprised a lot of people, Nelson, with my history in the military, and I was one of Donald Trump's national security advisors. And you mentioned the 1% or so. Well, your Tea Party is an example. After the 2008, government bailouts, the Tea
Yes.
Party it started on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange by a CNBC reporter of all things, or a commentator,
Hmm.
basically calling it out. Right? I think his name's
Right.
Santelli.
That's
So
right.
that went viral. And 2009, that your movement grew, and it kind of peaked, I believe, in 2014. But it was basically carried forward with the MAGA movement.
That's right.
And when I was with candidate Donald Trump on his airplane, you'd be amazed how small that campaign was. I mean, there were like 20 people on the airplane that were going with him from place to place, writing speeches, setting up rallies, giving him advice. I was privileged to be one of those. We had some interesting conversations, but it was a small group. And you're right. And so right now we have a very coordinated effort on the left. And one thing that I do want to try to, I think we need to dig into this more, but everybody talks about how much money the Democrats raise. I don't think the Democrats are raising that money. I think it appears from someplace,
Yes.
and they have the advantage of money.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to get into that. But
Yes.
you're right. I'm in this fight. The main thing I want to ask our fellow patriots to do is to show up and vote on August 4th in the primary to get the strongest candidate for the November election. I want them to get out and vote November 3rd. And there were a couple of lessons I learned traveling around with that small team supporting candidate Trump. And I liken it to almost the Continental Army that stuck by George Washington when all the experts said there was no way in hell we could win against the British Empire back then, against the powers that be, including the media, during Trump's 2016 campaign. And one of those, the key lesson was the Republicans often do not come out and vote. And I was just amazed, but they did show me statistics that prove that to be true. So through your show, through your organization, and congratulations on what you've accomplished, I want to encourage everybody to come out and vote in the primary, and the early voting has started, but mainly in the general election, because we can win this. And I wouldn't be in this race if I didn't think we had a great chance to win it. I will tell you that it's always hard to win in the midterm with the Republican president when you're running as a Republican. I said we might need a black swan or maybe 2 black ducklings. Well, I think that redistricting effort by the Democrats, the overreach, their basic lying in the wording of the referendum, the language there, I think that was one of the black swans or black ducklings. I think
Yes.
the Republicans are waking up. I think Democrats are waking up.
Yes.
And I think we just need people that want common sense solutions for everyday Americans. And we want to preserve America for what has made us successful. And I say,
Hmm.
as Donald Trump has said, we want to make America great again. But I'm saying, given what's going on now, I want to make America America again.
Yes.
I want to make America great. And
Uh-huh.
so I want to ask your followers to join me in this fight, and we can win it. And I think if we had people from our red areas showing up, maybe 70% or so, I'll do my part. The two most populated parts of the state are Northern Virginia and Hampton
Mhm.
Roads. I grew up in Hampton Roads, and I've been living in Northern Virginia for decades. So I know and am known in both areas that are the most populous. So I will do my part to get the red vote out, but also to make sure that we do as well as any Republican candidate can do. Uh, and the reasons why, number one, besides having lived and operated in both areas, Hampton Roads is the highest concentration of operational military anywhere in the nation, maybe the world. Northern Virginia is the highest concentration of military on the administrative side. So we have a lot of military that will understand what we're talking about, what we're trying to do. But I'm also a civil service retiree, so I can empathize with a lot of the people who have worked hard and did good things for the nation. And I think a lot of them agree we don't want any fraud, waste, and abuse.
No.
The good people working for the government realize that there is a lot of waste, and they understand that sometimes you need a kind of clean house. I've seen a rampant spending, and I was in charge of counter corruption in Afghanistan. We were wasting too many American lives and too much taxpayer dollars on a lost cause. It wasn't lost, but a lot of it wasn't well run. And my name came to the attention of the White House when I took on the Obama White House with some things I said, and I appeared on the front page of the Washington Times. And I kind of joke, it's never good as a general to take on the White House on the front page of the newspaper, but I thought it was important to do. Somebody had to be looking out for our soldiers and the way we're spending taxpayer dollars. Well, guess what? That brought my name to the attention of the Trump campaign, and they asked me to come on as one of their senior national security advisors. After they asked me to come on as their co-chair for Virginia, I couldn't do the co-chair part because I had not yet fully retired. But after I did, I was on board, literally and physically, to help Donald Trump win in 2016. And so I'm continuing the fight now.
Yes, it's an important fight. And the thing about Virginia, I know that the people watching are disappointed with the results of the last, and rightly so, with the last election. And they're not just disappointed with the result; they're disappointed with the people that our neighbors, our friends that voted for insane people, radical people. But I want to tell you this, and listen and remember what the general spoke about. Listen and remember. I wanted to also let you know that we did talk about losing that election, but because of the wording, which is one of the reasons why that resolution was illegal, that constitutional amendment was illegal, was the wording. Imagine this: 25% out of the 100% of the Republicans that voted, and the Republicans that voted were the very Republicans that were invested and interested because they voted in April. Who votes in April? But they did. 25% of them voted yes because they saw the wording says elections, clean elections. And what have we been saying since 2020? We want our elections to be clean and not be decided by fraud. And so we lost 25%. Imagine if the 25% voted the way they were supposed to vote and vote no, we would have won. So that's one thing. The second thing is that Governor Spanberger, is the face of the Democrat Party. Spanberger, within the space of a few months, has earned the lowest rating of any governor in Virginia history. That taints her, and that also taints her party. The illegal actions for the resolution also taints her party because they have tried to do something illegal. It cost the state of Virginia, cost all these taxpayers money to pay for that election, and they lied about it. And they also lied about affordability. So any person running against the Democrats at this point has a very good chance, no matter how much money the Democrats have. So I want you to be very, make a very, just think about this clearly when you think about helping good candidates this year, that you're not wasting your time. Imagine we have socialists, 200 that won elections against incumbents. It is because their people are coordinated, that's one, and they have enthusiasm. We need those two things. Right now, we have the structure in place with all our natural allies. We can coordinate between them. We're all friends, by the way. The only other thing that we need that we can't control is fighting apathy. That is our greatest threat. That has always been our greatest danger, that apathy. If somehow you can consider what we're looking at the battlefield, and that you consider that we have a chance to win, that hope can generate that enthusiasm, and that's what we need. And that's why I was talking to General Mizusawa as how we're going to approach these people that may have been misguided in their vote last election.
Well, I do appreciate that, Nelson. It harkens back to an old ad that said an educated consumer is our best customer. In this case, I think an educated citizen is our best voter.
That's
The
right.
ones that are educated on what's happening, the ones who understand history. I mean, we have some comparable examples not too far from home. I mean, back at the end of the Cold War, when the wall came down, uh, Hungary started it by pulling down a fence. I spent a lot of time on the Iron Curtain. And I was in the Senate at the time, and we were expanding eastward and welcoming new people into NATO and among the group of free nations. But I said something that was a little controversial. I said, I think it might be good to have a Cuba and a North Korea. And they said, why? I said, because I think we're going to need a constant reminder of what the alternative is to free enterprise and capitalism, and keep them as a showcase for what happens for people who try the opposite experiment. And, the Soviets learned it, the Russians learned it. But I think right now people are not learning the lessons of history
No,
of the alternative system.
no.
And there was a time when you asked who are the most important people who ever existed on this earth. And one of them was Jesus Christ. The other one was Karl Marx. Now, Karl Marx has faded in history, but I guess the people who forgot what that system ends up doing are now favoring a system that has already been shown to not be successful and worse. I mean, it's very oppressive. And unfortunately, I see some of their tactics here in our country.
Yes.
So, yeah, we're going to do everything we can. You asked about affordability. I just want to give you three points. One of them, energy undergirds almost everything that's important to a successful economy. I've always been in favor of nuclear power. In general, it's cleaner, safer, cheaper, and more reliable. The left has been fighting that for decades. We haven't had a new start. I think one's coming on in Georgia soon. But back when I was going to law school and graduate school up in New England, they were fighting one up in New Hampshire. And now they're fighting fossil fuels. Essentially, I guess they don't want us to have any energy. So I'm a big proponent of small modular nuclear reactors.
Yes.
I think it's going to solve a lot of our energy problems. To the extent there was issues with nuclear before, it's not your father's or grandfather's nuclear power. It's not your grandfather's or father's Democrat Party either, by the way, for those of you who think the Democrats are what they used to be. So I want to accelerate bringing those online, because to the extent that fossil fuels have issues, nuclear will solve them. But I think they can go hand in hand. I think we need to continue to use cheap, reliable, and clean fossil fuels while we bring nuclear capability online. I think housing is a major issue as well. People talk about affordability. The generations have different affordability issues. As I say, that everybody has their own version because they have different expenses. For the older generations, housing, and a lot of us medical. Younger generations is housing and transportation and food items. But housing is a common one for both. I think we need to free up housing to make real estate cheaper for our younger generations to invest in and buy and live in. And one way to do that is basically to increase the capital gains exclusion on the sale of one's principal residence. Right now, it's capped at 250,000 for a single or 500,000 for a married couple. So those dollar figures go back to the 1990s. We're like 20, 27, 28 years later. They weren't indexed to inflation. So the way inflation has gone, we should double both of those. That'll make it easier for the older generations to sell their principal residences without having to pay a lot of taxes on it, which I can understand why they don't want to do that if they're going to be spending a lot of money on taxes that they may not have. They might get it from the sale, but it's basically incentivizing people to not sell and just to pass it on to their heirs where they have a step up in basis. But that's not freeing up the real estate that I think people need now. So I think in general, Trump does not get credit for the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. One of its major features was to extend the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was originally passed in 2017, and which would have expired at the end of 2025. If that would have expired and we would have reverted to the Tax Reform Act of 1986,
Oof.
all of our tax rates would have shot up a lot. The tax brackets would have been compressed. So people would be paying, like 95% of people would be paying a lot more taxes than they are paying now. And we don't get credit for it, or the Trump administration and the Congress that passed it don't get credit for it because it was an extension of something that was originally passed in 2017. So people have a hard time comparing it to what could have been the alternative. So I think they've done a lot on the tax front, but I think getting that capital gains exclusion would be another major step for affordability, along with bringing on nuclear power. And the reason why we haven't done that, just in case people don't know, is the Senate procedure. You need a 60-vote majority in order to pass things that don't go through reconciliation. And the reconciliation process means it has to be revenue neutral. So they weren't able to get everything through. And another example is, people ask me about no taxes on Social Security. Well, that's true for most people. And what they had to do to get it through reconciliation, it wouldn't have passed otherwise. I think they did what they could, but basically they implemented a senior bonus deduction in addition to a much more increased standard deduction. So I think by and large, a lot of the people who are receiving Social Security break even though there are some higher income earners who itemize who won't get the advantage of it. So I think we've done a lot on affordability. I think we need to do more. And those are the two areas I would tackle: housing and energy.
Well, the other thing that Trump is doing, which of course keeps suppressing the good news. I wonder why, but there's all kinds of regulations that increase the cost of construction of new buildings, and he's doing a great job. I think he just signed an executive order to reduce and cut the amount of regulations that prevent builders and constructions of new homes from happening. So that should do really well, because constructing new homes will be, once that hits the market, that should stabilize the rise in costs. And maybe with the deportation of almost 20 million illegal aliens, because they're living somewhere, that might free up some homes too. Who knows?
Yeah, I agree, and that's a good point you're making. So I surprise people, like I said, given my background in national security and being one of President Trump's national security advisors. My first thing that I want to do as the senator for Virginia is to try to get on the Senate Judiciary Committee, because I am an attorney and I know warfare, and now I see lawfare here at home.
Yes.
And so I'm going to do everything I can to get judges who do what judges are supposed to do and not be judicial. We call them activists.
Yeah, that's a bad word for it.
I think it's judicial malpractice. I think they're violating their ethics. One of the main requirements of a judge is to be impartial. But when the Democrat justices and judges go with the Democrat side of any sort of case or controversy, I think it shows their true colors. So I want to get on the Senate Judiciary Committee and tackle things where I think I can have the most effectiveness. Uh, when people ask me about different issues, I said, I realized that the best way to get things done was to help get a Republican president elected. And that's why I helped Donald Trump, because that president could appoint or at least nominate Supreme Court justices. And he was able to appoint three of them. I'm proud to say one of them, Neil Gorsuch, was my summer intern in the early 1990s when I was operating as a lawyer at one of the larger firms. And because of Neil Gorsuch and his other partners up there that have been appointed, we have new rulings on, the Dobbs decision, finally overruled Roe v. Wade, which would not have happened anywhere but the Supreme Court. We have the Heller decision, which made sure that our Second Amendment rights were protected. And fortunately, what Virginia just tried to do was deemed unconstitutional, and rightfully so. So the judicial branch is the new frontier of where things get done. George Soros has already recognized this. That's why he's
Yes.
been funding judges and
Yes.
justices. I was extremely surprised when I had lunch with people from Europe. In this case, it was from Bosnia and Albania. They told me Soros' son Alex is doing the same thing out there.
Yes.
And I
It's
said,
awful.
wow. I said, you know what? That explains a lot, because we're afraid that the U.S. is going to go the way the EU is going. The EU needs to open its eyes to what's going on. And the new battle space now is in the court system, the judiciary, because they're making a lot of the fundamental decisions now. And once again, I'll point to the nullification of the Virginia Supreme Court's of the referendum. That should have been 7-0.
Yeah.
It shouldn't even been close.
Mhm.
And I believe that they kicked the can past the referendum, basically giving the Democrat appointed justices a victory up front, because they thought that the referendum would be so lopsided that it would be too hard for the other justices who did their jobs to nullify it. So once again, kudos go out to the people who went out there and fought against the redistricting, because even though they didn't win, they did win. They fought a battle that made it much easier for the justices. I'm not saying the justices wouldn't have done the right thing anyway, but made it a lot easier in the public's view, in terms of the media and everything else, for them to basically call it the way it should have been called, even before the referendum took place.
Mhm. Yeah.
So,
This the court action, the lawsuit to deal with the illegal actions of this referendum was important, not just to protect because not just to protect the Virginia citizens so that their votes count, because they don't talk about it, but we have about 46% of the population, the citizens that vote for Republicans. Had this referendum passed, their voices, and the ones that are independents, and also the ones that are in the Democrat Party that says no more, can't do it anymore, you're too extreme, they would not have a choice. The incumbent Democrats would have a huge advantage in the congressional seats. And so we would have been disenfranchising an
yeah,
enormous
yeah,
number of people. And that needs to be something that we need to remind people throughout the state,
right.
because we would have, and I think that's where the backlash came against Spanberger. That's why her ratings dropped so low. So this is
Sure.
fresh in their mind. So I think a candidate that's running against Warner can tie him to this, because that's his party.
Well, right. And, he's in a key leadership role, and he's abused it by not stepping up. And one of the issues that I know better than anybody is there was a failure of leadership on his part during the Russia collusion hoax. The FBI showed up on my door on a Sunday with no notice. There was loud banging, and I went to the door, and they flashed their badges, and they said, "You know why we're here?" And I said, "No, I do not know why you're here." They said, "You've been identified as the key person between the Trump campaign and these other people we have identified as being linked to Russia. I can give you names. I'll spare you the details now." And so they knew I was a general. They did not know I was an attorney. I said, "Do you have a search warrant or any kind of warrant?" Their jaws dropped, and they said, "No, we do not." And I says, "Well, I thought you were other solicitors, and I'm going to give you the same answer I would have given them. I don't have time to talk now. I've got company here at my house. And I said, but listen, I can help you with what you're looking at because I was the only one that knew what the campaign's actual connection was to the people who were connected to Russia. And so I asked them to call me back and to sit down with me. I would give them everything they would need to basically put it into an investigation that should never have occurred because it was totally fabricated from the Democrat side. Instead of cooperating and taking me up on my offer, I got a subpoena. I got a subpoena that required me to show up unless I turned over 19 months worth of my private communications with 11 other people. And so here I am, having served 41 years overseas in uniform and fighting for this country, and to come home to be on the receiving end of what I can only describe as a rogue police state action. So Mark Warner was the head of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. He was privy to the same information that Adam Schiff was, and he had to have known that Adam Schiff was making things up that just did not exist. Did Mark Warner stand up at all? No, he did not. And you know what? I can understand being partisan, but what happened during that was much worse than the Watergate scandal.
Yes.
I don't think calling it a hoax does it justice. It was a fraud perpetrated on the U.S. government and on the U.S. people, which was tantamount to a criminal action. And we'll have more to say about that. But I do believe that a lot of Americans want somebody in office that's pretty much normal, that can identify with them, with their day-to-day problems, but that can also look ahead to the azimuth that this country is going on, both overseas and at home. I spent a lot of time overseas. I understand the importance of when and how we can use our military in the U.S. national security interests and to tie it to taking care of our taxpayer dollars. And I actually wrote candidate Donald Trump's national security or foreign policy platform when the New York Times and many other of the so-called pundits were basically attacking him for not having a coherent national security or foreign policy strategy. Well, I wrote one based upon all the things that candidate Trump was saying. He read it right in front of me, said he loved it, said to get it published. We try to get it published in the New York Times because they're his main critics. I guess you and your followers won't be surprised to hear that they pretty much refused to print it. It turned out to be better. We got it published in the USA Today about 2 weeks, about 10 days before the actual election. And the title was Trump Foreign Policy Favors U.S. Taxpayers. You know, that wasn't my recommended headline. I wanted to call it the Trump Doctrine, but from a political perspective, it couldn't have been a better headline.
Yeah.
So I think I helped Donald Trump win the campaign. He was an amazing man. I was with him from the very beginning. And if you spent time with him, you would realize how good he was and how much he deserved to be our leader. And I knew he was going to be disruptive. And that was one reason I supported him. Just like the Tea Party was disruptive. Sometimes you need disruption.
Sometimes.
Especially the way things are going. And people who love the status quo, I have my suspicions that the status quo is something that they can continue to leverage basically to their advantage and to the disadvantage to the U.S. population and the American taxpayers. And, you know, one example is who the heck could be against the Save America Act? Who could be against securing our borders? It's basic issues. And the fact that there are people out there that don't want this to go through, I mean, they've got to have an ulterior motive. I just don't get it. So I'm going to fight hard to secure our borders, get the Save America Act through. And a harder one is to ensure that only U.S. citizens are counted in the census, which determines which congressional representation you get. It's not fair for some states that have a lot of illegal aliens counted in the census to have more representation than states that basically help enforce the rules against illegal citizens here. So I'm going to fight. I mean, these are common sense issues. I mean, why are we even fighting them? And the fact that we're having to fight them is the reason I got into this race, is because I think I can win. And I'm going to call on all of the good citizens of the U.S. in Virginia, regardless of your party, to help get me across that finish line, because I'm going to be representing all Virginians, not just on one side of the aisle or the other. I have a good reputation. When I worked in the Senate in the 1990s, I did work across the aisle because I realized that was the way to get things done. And the Democrats actually offered me an appointment in the Clinton administration because of the national security job. And I served in the Clinton administration, even though they knew I was a Republican. This was at the time that William Cohen, a Republican senator, came over to be the Secretary of Defense, because I guess they ran out of good people to help do things. And this was a key time in our nation because we were trying to reap the dividends of winning the Cold War and expanding, friendly countries in Europe, engagement and enlargement. And so we are where we are in a much better position than we were during the Cold War, in part because of some of my efforts in the Senate in the mid to late 1990s and later on in the Pentagon in the late 90s and the early aughts.
Mm-hmm.
I'm proud of what I've done. It's a shame that in many ways we're well behind where we should have been at this stage in our country's development.
Yeah, so just a reminder, and maybe I guess people need to be reminded. Maybe not so much now because events are very recent. The 80% of, maybe even more in Virginia, support the police. They support the police. They back them. No defunding. They also support the deportation of illegal criminals that are having criminal operations in Virginia, which we actually started to do before this current governor took over and made this state waive the laws. It applies to all of us Americans, but if you're a foreign illegal alien committing a crime, well, we're going to make sure that the law that we have to hold you for deportation, we're going to ignore that. So you got all of that. You got the lying. You got the increased costs on taxes, on gas that they've increased. These deals that they made with with other states, with carbon tax and all that. That's just jacking up the prices to high heaven. All of this stuff is hurting us. So tying that in with the Democrats is really important. The redistricting, silencing over 44%.
Yep.
And the independent voice and the Democrats who may be disgruntled about the radicalness of the Democrat Party, silencing. All of this comes into play. Most people don't like that. 80% want to see these people, illegal aliens, sent away. And 80% want clean and honest elections. The Democrats are preventing that from happening. So I think the Republicans have a really good chance. And Mark Warner is tied into all of this stuff. He was a governor of Virginia, and then he became a United States senator, and all of these very bad changes that the Virginian citizens, none of these changes are changes that the Virginia citizens support. So tying them, he cannot absolve it. He cannot wash his hands of all this stuff because he's one of the leaders of the Democrat Party in Virginia.
Well, yes, he is. But first of all, our law enforcement personnel deserve all the support we can give to them. It's a tough job. People don't realize how tough their jobs are. And they have to sometimes make split second decisions to do the right thing. It's very underappreciated, in many cases, unappreciated, and even worse, given the agenda the left has. Number one, there should be no sanctuary cities. There should be no sanctuary states. There should be no sanctuary localities. And first of all, you have the U.S. Supremacy Clause, but our law enforcement personnel are enforcing the laws. They did not make the laws. They are paid and sacrificing. And when I say sacrifice, I mean it literally in many cases, to enforce the laws that we've passed. And so they deserve our support. Now, we're always going to have some issues with the way they've conducted themselves, and it's not deliberate. I think they have to react to very gray areas. And I think the left has goaded them into these very difficult situations where you're going to have mistakes. And as long as they're honest mistakes, they deserve our support. Just like any other agency in the government, if we have a bad apple, they should be weeded out.
Yes.
No exception to that. On the other hand, by and large, these people are doing the job that very few Americans are willing to do. As somebody who's gotten my hands dirty and bloody in certain cases, I applaud what they do. They get 100% of my support, 110% of my support, and the left needs to stop what they're doing.
Yes.
To me, that's no question. And for those localities that decide they do not want to cooperate, and other states get a lot of their money by federal grants. And I think there should be a price to pay.
Yes.
And especially if they take any actions that endangers any of our law enforcement personnel or makes their job any harder than it has to be, I think we should be taking names. And there's no place for that in our country.
No, there isn't. And of course, our governor is now facing lawsuits, which we'll have to pay to defend. So she's violating our Second Amendment rights, and she's putting at risk ICE agents who are just trying to do their job and to do it in a way that doesn't put their lives and the lives of their family at risk. So because the left has upped the rhetoric to such extreme toxic levels, they have no choice but to cover their faces to protect their lives and their family. And now this governor has passed a law saying that it's against the law for them to be able to do so. That's just outrageous, I think.
Well, everybody agrees, or I hope, that we're a nation of laws. And if we don't enforce those laws, then we're not a nation of laws. It's one or the other. And so if people who wanted to come in our country illegally knew that we were not going to enforce the laws, there would be no deterrent for them to come in. And it's too easy to come in. And that's the first thing we've done is stop the bleeding. It's the first thing you do on a battlefield, stop the bleeding. Then you can figure other things out. So building that wall or doing whatever we need to do to control our borders. If you can't control your border, you can't control your country. It's that simple. The nation state has been the primary organizing principle of countries going back to 1648. There was a Treaty of Westphalia. And you know what? I don't know if there's a better way to organize a country than the concept of a nation state. But if you don't have a border, and I've served on borders, I've served on bloody borders. I served on in the Korean DMZ for 13 months. I served on the Iraq-Iran border, on the Afghanistan-Iran border, on the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. I know how important borders are. It's a shame that we have to come back here and worry about our own borders. So that's job one. And then when it comes to the deportations, I mean, if we don't enforce it, like I said, and then there's not going to be deterrent from people to continue to pour in. The birthright citizen case in the Supreme Court, I'm not surprised by the outcome. I'm disappointed by the outcome. I think a good thing is it was a 5-4 vote. And I think that we can peel off one of those two votes by having Congress basically define what subject to the jurisdiction thereof means.
Exactly.
And I've said that for decades. I said this birthright citizenship thing that was a post-Civil War amendment designed to basically ensure that the freed slaves had all the benefits and freedoms of U.S. citizens. It's been kind of sabotaged and subverted and being used for things it was never intended to do.
Exactly.
So I think Congress has a key role to basically stop the bleeding there as well.
Yeah. And Chief Justice Kavanagh, he pointed the direction of a legislative workaround to this. Yes. And you just defined it. You just define the parameters, and those definitions can go and fit snugly to the arguments and the debates when they were coming up with the 14th Amendment. You can go with the original arguments, the original debates, what the people had in mind when they came up with the 14th Amendment, and you can clarify that with the legislation. And according to Kavanaugh, that should pass constitutional muster. You don't have to change the Constitution.
Quite frankly, I was surprised we didn't try the legislative route before we went to the Supreme Court. But I think it made sense now in retrospect. We see a 5-4 vote. I don't think Justice Roberts' opinion addressed the key points. And it had more to do with the president's ability to do something via executive order. So I actually, even though it looked bad in terms of not a win, I think it is good that we know the path to get to
Exactly.
So I'm hopeful, and I want to be part of that legislative process because I know how important it is.
Yes, it is. Yeah, protects our country from this very lucrative, birth tourism that's emerging, and having very rich Chinese people coming in and planes and giving birth and taking their child back. That's just not right.
Well, Nelson, it's even worse than I haven't heard anybody talking about the fact that 12 nautical miles off of our mean low tide is considered territorial waters. It's hard to prevent boats from coming in within 12 nautical miles of our shores and being able to have a baby born there and being able to prove through geolocation that it happened. So, one of the things the founding fathers could not anticipate, and this, of course, occurred after the Civil War, they didn't know about airplanes at that time. They didn't know about technology and how it would make it easier to enter a country. And so technology has changed to the point where a lot of things that might have made sense back when it was passed don't make sense anymore. And I'll just use the fact that the Air Force is not in the Constitution, right? We talk about armies and the Navy, but the Air Force isn't in there. Why? Because people, the founding fathers and the other people who voted on the amendments just did not anticipate how technology could basically be subverted, be used to subvert the intent of what the Constitution says. So I think we have the right Supreme Court justices in place, even though I know there's a lot of disappointment with Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett right now.
Yes.
I think we'll have another bite at the apple, and I think we should give them another shot. And you mentioned all the regulations. There was a big ruling against the Chevron decision.
Yes.
That says the courts were the proper place to basically interpret statutes. And I always thought that who would ever second guess that? But I guess the more liberal courts handed it to the administrative state, and they went haywire with it. So I'm glad that Neil Gorsuch was the lead on overturning the Chevron decision. And for those of you in your audience who are not familiar with it, it basically allowed the executive branch, and you know what happens when the Democrats are in charge, basically to define statutes any way that they thought was reasonable, even though it was clearly not what was intended by the statutes. So now the courts should be doing that. So that's one reason I think the judicial branch is the key place that we need to focus on and get judges there and ensure that bad judges don't get there.
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons why we're restoring our republic, because the Chevron situation is the legislature, the Congress would defer to the bureaucrats in all these powerful agencies, and the courts would defer to the expertise of all these agencies, and they were violating the rights of all of us. Basically, there was no recourse, and if we had to appeal a decision that to protect our property, we had to go to the very agency to appeal and make our arguments. So there was no recourse. So that was an important decision. And then the second one just happened 2 weeks ago. I think it was the Slaughter case, where now the leads, the heads of these agencies like the SCC, the FCC, all of these agencies can now be fired without just cause. It used to be you had to come up with some kind of reason, crime. Now he can fire it because they could block any initiative that they want, and they're served for 7 years. Now, because of this decision, now they can be fired.
Yeah, so that's Article 2 of our Constitution. It's clear how the president can appoint executive officers, senior officers, and I had to be confirmed a number of times as I rose through the ranks. But yeah, it doesn't really say much about getting rid of people in the executive branch, which means the president should have plenary authority there. I know they carved out the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. Interesting point, but I guess I think it was a good decision, and his attempt to replace one of the members of that board. And it's kind of crazy to me. There are people that are arguing, well, she didn't do what she did when she was a governor. She did it before she was a governor. I'm thinking, so getting appointed to a key government position absolves you of any wrongdoing prior to getting there? Seriously? Okay, everybody should be clamoring for government positions then, right? So anyway, I think it was a good step. But once again, I think the judicial branch is where the key battles are taking place for our republic. And that's why, even though I do have a long, I think, successful history, and by the way, Virginia has the highest per capita defense spending of any state in the nation. I will continue to do everything I can to help Virginia and our nation in that regard. I served on the Senate Armed Services Committee as a 3-star equivalent civilian back a couple of decades ago. So I can always be very influential there. I hope to get appointed there. But I think the Judiciary Committee is key. And I also believe the Defense Subcommittee of the Senate Appropriations Committee, which does control the spending, The Armed Services Committee controls the policy.
Mhm.
So the Appropriations Committee and Judiciary Committee would be my top two choices. And that's the first thing I would do as a senator, is making sure I was in a position where I could help Virginia and the nation.
Hmm. Well, this has been a really fascinating talk. You never know how these things are going to go in the very beginning, but this has been real fascinating. I'll have one question. If you do win, the primary date is August. It's a new
4th.
one, August
4th.
4th. So now you got a more time, even though, how providential is that? This is the first time we had to move a primary date. And it's because the Democrats try to do something illegal. So even though
Yep.
you came in late, now you got an extra a cushion. But here's my question: if you do win, and you are the Republican candidate for the U.S. Senate, will you come back on our show so we can, discuss further as the candidate against Warner?
Well, first of all, to answer your question, yes. Second of all, I'm not sure if it did us any. It was not intended to do us favors. It compressed
No.
the general election season, so we have less time to go up against the incumbent. But
Yeah, that's
right
true.
now, I'm fighting to take out Democrats. Okay, I'm fighting to take out Democrats. I am I think the clear favorite for the nomination. You never want to presume anything, but
No,
the prediction markets, which have proven to be more accurate than polls, have me 50 to 60 points ahead, which is
that's
a lot. The results of the family foundations and the city elders debate in Stanton just came out last night, and I poll it was 64%, about 40 points ahead of the second place, and then the
yeah.
first debate up in Northern Virginia, I won very handily. I had around 50%, and so the other two split the other 50%. So I don't have time to ignore the general election. So I'm going to have to fight the general election while not being presumptuous about the primary. But I will ask your followers to come out and vote. And I make it simple. I say, I don't see much of a difference on the issues among the candidates in the primary. So I think they need to basically nominate the candidate who has the best chance of defeating Mark Warner in November, but also the candidate who can do the best job as your senator afterwards. And in the Senate, I will be the highest ranking military officer in the Senate. I will also be the most highly decorated combat veteran in the entire Congress. So I'll have an outsized amount of influence on things that really affect Virginia in terms of defense spending, our national security policies, which a lot of the families here at home, especially out of the Hampton Roads area when they deploy, a lot of their Navy personnel, but the Army, the other services as well. I mean, I grew up in that. I miss my dad a lot. My kids miss me a lot when I was deployed. And so I want to be their champion in the U.S. Senate for those matters as well.
Well, thank you for joining us on this Splash of Tea. I think this discussion was really good. We even got into the weeds and still made it interesting, which is a very hard thing to do. so
Well,
so it was a very impressive. I learned a lot about the depths of your experience, and it has a broad spectrum. So so I'm glad that you were the one that got to join us on this very special Independence Day Splash of Tea. Thank you for joining us, and Godspeed to your campaign.
Thank you. It's my honor and privilege to share this time with you as well.